So Congress immediately passes a resolution that allows the president to take all necessary measures to repel any attack or forces of the United States. It was called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. What happened is Johnson begins to gradually increase U.S. troops into Vietnam. So by 1965, we had 180,000 troops in Vietnam. In March 1965, we would land in Da Nang. And at that point, we would start a campaign called Operation Rolling Thunder, which is where planes would attack the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And the Ho Chi Minh Trail was basically just a network of roads, paths, bridges that wound from North Vietnam through Cambodia and Laos and into South Vietnam. What happened is that the Vietnamese would use these roads and bridges to get supplies back and forth from North Vietnam and try to get around to the South Vietnamese soldiers, or the Viet Cong, alright, the communists in the South. Sorry about that. Now, the war. The war wasn't like anything else that Americans had ever fought in. When we were talking about fighting in dense jungle, muddy swamps, rice paddies, it was nothing like Americans had ever seen. People had said you couldn't tell your friend from your enemy because the Viet Cong would blend in so well to their surroundings. You couldn't tell who was on your side, who wasn't on your side. If you'd be walking down the street, if people would let you pass, or you'd be walking down the street and someone would attack you, you just couldn't tell. So what happened is America would start these search and destroy missions. And basically what these search and destroy missions was that they would go into towns and they would seek out Viet Cong or North Vietnamese units and destroy them. They thought that they could defeat the communists or force them to negotiate. Now, napalm. Because of the dense jungle, alright, napalm was used as an explosive and burned intensely to destroy jungle growth, so that you could see where you were going, you could see who you were fighting, you could see where your enemy was. Also, another thing that was very important that was used is Agent Orange. And it's a herbicide, alright, that increased visibility, that was used to increase visibility. So that when you were fighting and you were going through these dense jungles or these swampy places, that it made it somewhat easier for you to fight. After fighting for so long, many of the American troops became extremely frustrated. And one of the things that they always said is that the frustration grew because no matter how many times you seemed to kill the enemy, kill the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese, you'd kill 10 would show up the next day. You'd have to go back into the same towns that you had been fighting in, and there would be more men. And they kept attacking, kept constantly attacking and attacking and attacking and attacking, and it didn't really seem like you were going anywhere. This is a primary source from Rumor of War. It says, when we marched into the rice paddies on the damp March afternoon, we carried along with our packs and rifles the implicit convictions that the Viet Cong would be quickly beaten. We kept the packs and rifles, the convictions we lost. Basically just stating that they thought it would be so easy to win this war. They thought it would just be, they'd go in there, they'd destroy this smaller, weaker little country. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. They had such extreme resolve and determination that they wanted to be independent. So while this was all going on in Vietnam, what was happening on the home front? What was really going on the home front? Well, the first thing is that people were protesting, right? We had protest, the draft, there's going to be political opposition, violence, and then another election. And I'm going to touch on each one of those topics in just a few minutes here. But what we're going to start with is the different types of protests that were happening in America. Okay, so there was this idea of pro-war versus anti-war. Right? And these groups would attack each other and would just unbelievable anger toward one another. And it was said that if you were a supporter of the war, you were a killer. You were a killer. But if you were a protester of the war, you were seen as treacherous. You were a traitor. You were not fighting with America's battle. The people believed, what really happened is that people believed, in America, they believed that if there was opposition to the war, it was because they believed that the conflict in Vietnam was a civil war. Okay? It was a civil war between North and South Vietnam, and it was based on corrupt dictatorship, and defending the country was immoral and unjust, so they condemned it. The counterculture is this Counterculture is a movement that rejected traditional American values. Some common symbols that you probably see in the counterculture is blue jeans, long hair like the gentleman in these pictures, fighting against, your parents, differing in opinions, strictly differing in opinion in your parents. Some other parts of the counterculture were more serious challenges to traditional middle-class values. These young adults refused to follow customary social roles of the work and family. They just wanted to reject all aspects of society. Now, the draft. Now, we had to have people that would go into the war. As you can see here, this is a picture of the lottery, of how it worked. At 18 years of age, all men that reached it had to go and register for the selective service system. It was a law. You had to do it once you reached 18. Okay? Now, there's obviously going to be opposition to this because there's opposition at home, so people don't want us fighting in a war. They're not going to want to be drafted. It's basically two types of opposition. Alright. People that were strongly opposed to the American involvement in Vietnam believed that by ending the draft, you'd halt the supply of soldiers, which makes sense. It makes logical sense that if you stop the draft, if you're not having American soldiers go into the war, you're not going to have people to fight for you, so there's not going to be a war anymore. But there was these others that believed that the draft was unfair, that boards had the power to give people deferments, and deferments are saying, well, you don't have to enter, you have to sign up, but you won't be put in the draft for this reason or that reason, or if you have money. Most of it was because they deferred people who were in college. And if you were going to school, which is basically middle to upper class, you weren't subjected to the draft. So what happened is it became basically a fight for the lower class, and that the deferments discriminated